Will Cameroon suffer the same fate as previous African Cup of Nations champions to fail to qualify for the World Cup? Well, that remains to be seen. But if you look at what's going on in the last decade or so, there seems to be some sort of pattern emerging where every other African Cup of Nations winner fails to qualify for the World Cup that takes place after that tournament. Um, the reason why I use the words every other is because due to the fact that the African Cup of Nations takes place every 2 years, that means two tournaments are held for every one World Cup before the World Cup takes place. So there creates the possibility of having two different African champions sandwiched in between two different World Cups. And with the exception of Egypt winning in 06, 08, and 2010, the Triple Crown, that has happened. We've had different African champions every year since 2010. And half of those champions have went on to qualify for the World Cup. Tunisia, Nigeria, Ivory Coast. But half as well have failed to qualify for the World Cup. Egypt twice, unfortunately. Zambia in 2012. And I believe it was Cameroon in 2006. So it's the reason I bring this up is because current African champions, Cameroon, are in really poor position in Group B of African World Cup qualifying. They're sitting on 2 points from 2 games, a full 4 points behind Nigeria, who have the maximum 6 points from those 2 games. Now, every team in that group, it's a very tough group, by the way. It involves Algeria, Nigeria, Cameroon, and Zambia. It's the only World Cup qualifying group in Africa where 3 of the 4 teams were previous participants in each of the last 2 World Cups in 2010 and 2014. Now, with 4 games remaining for each team, Cameroon has a lot of legwork to make up. The next 2 games are absolutely crucial. They play Nigeria home and away, followed by, I believe, a road game in Zambia and a home game against Algeria. Now, Nigeria, now that they are 4 points ahead of Cameroon and 5 points ahead of Algeria and Zambia, they can afford to slip up a little bit. They have a little margin for error now, whereas Cameroon really cannot afford to drop that many more points. It's probably the case that Cameroon would have to beat Nigeria at home in the next game, as well as get a draw on the road. They probably need a max of 4 points from a possible 6 in those 2 fixtures. Otherwise, they're going to fall along into the pattern of being an African champion that fails to qualify for the World Cup. And like I said before, Zambia, I believe Egypt twice, and Cameroon in the early 2000s both suffered that same fate. Looking at another African champions from 2015, the Ivory Coast, I do believe the Ivory Coast will qualify for the World Cup, though I don't think it's going to be as comfortable as it once was because they are a dwindling golden generation. They are kind of on the way out as far as an African superpower. They had a very disappointing 2015 African Cup of Nations performance where they failed to defend their title and they crashed out in the group stages. But I do think the Ivory Coast will get through. They're in a qualifying group right now with Morocco, Mali, and Gabon. And they're in good position right now. I expect them to stay steady. I think Morocco is their main threat right now, since they're coached under Hervé Renard, who's a very good African coach. He's a European coach, but he's prolific for having coached many African sides at the African Cup of Nations and winning the tournament twice with 2 separate teams. The first ever manager in history to have done that. I just think that Ivory Coast will still have too much for Morocco, and I think they're going to get the results on the road in Gabon and Mali where they need it to clinch the group and secure a spot at the World Cup. But Cameroon do not have that luxury right now. They are struggling a little bit more. And I think Cameroon could very well join the list of African champions that failed to qualify for the World Cup, which is unfortunate because we saw sort of a revival of the Indomitable Lions earlier this winter in Gabon, the host nation, and nobody expected them to go on to win the tournament. I certainly did not. I had them quarterfinals max, but This was the first time Cameroon won in 15 years the African Cup of Nations. They seem to be back, but the question is, do they have too much to make up for in the group? I think probably, unless Nigeria collapse spectacularly, I think they do. I don't think Cameroon's going to make it to the World Cup. Even with the late surge in qualifying, it just seems like it's too much. It's a too high of a mountain to climb at this point. If you go look at the table for Group B of African qualifying, you'll know what I mean. And while I'm at it, I might as well tell you which 5 teams from Africa I think are going to qualify for the World Cup. I think in Group A, it's really a two-legged race between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Tunisia. The DR Congo are really an up-and-coming side in Africa. Some are calling them the next big superpower on the continent. They had a very impressive performance at the African Cup of Nations. I thought they could have gone on to win it if they didn't choke against Ghana in the quarterfinals, a Ghanaian team that was very underwhelming and was very lucky to get to the semis this time around. And it's between them and Tunisia. I think that could come down to as close of a margin as goal difference, because that's exactly where they are right now. They're both on 6 points. Congo's ahead on goal difference. The crucial matches are going to be Congo against Tunisia, both home and away. If Congo manages to get a win at home and maybe even a loss on the road in Tunisia, but just with a superior goal difference, I think they take care of business in the rest of the group against Libya and Guinea. I think DR Congo should be considered slight favorites to top that group and qualify. I'm going to go with Congo ahead of Tunisia just by a bit. Group B, like I said, I think Nigeria is going to come ahead of Cameroon. Sorry, Cameroon, African champions who are playing in the Confederations Cup this summer. I don't see you back at the World Cup. Group C, Ivory Coast, Mali, Gabon, and Morocco. I think the Ivory Coast will do it. Maybe this time, their 4th World Cup in a row, they'll finally be able to advance out of the group stages. They failed to do so in each of the last 3 World Cups, especially in 2014 when it was a very promising, very lenient group on them. I think they'll get back there. I think they're going to be one of the few teams from Africa that were in Brazil to make it to Russia. In Group D guarantees us a new participant in the World Cup. Not overall, I don't mean like debutants, but first participation. That a team that did not participate, in Brazil in 2014 is what I'm saying. And that group is Burkina Faso, Senegal, South Africa, and Cape Verde Islands. I think it's a very tough, tight group to call. The gap in quality is probably the narrowest of all the 5 groups combined. I'm going to pick Burkina Faso. I thought they had a very successful, very impressive run to the semifinals and 3rd place at the African Cup of Nations this time around. They'll want to sort of make amends for failing to qualify for 2014 when they just missed out to Algeria on the away goals rule. They were the only side in Africa that year in 2013 to fail to qualify by such a small margin. I think this time they can do it. I think Senegal is probably the better team in that group. Senegal is probably the best team in that group between Burkina Faso and South Africa. But I think Burkina Faso is in better form at the moment, and we saw how Senegal underwhelmed at the Nations Cup. Many billed them as favorites, but they crashed on penalties in the quarterfinals against Cameroon, the eventual champions. So I'm going to pick Burkina Faso to make their first ever appearance at the World Cup. And in Group E, Egypt, Ghana, Uganda, and the Republic of Congo. I am going to cautiously, optimistically go with Egypt because I think surely we are too far ahead right now of Ghana, of 5 points difference, to give up that kind of advantage with only 4 games remaining in qualification. And I really hope we don't crash out and allow Ghana to make a late surge to come back into it. Ghana are not in good form, as I mentioned, I think, before in a previous video. Uganda are one of the weakest sides left in African qualification, though they cannot be underestimated whatsoever. But I really think if we can get a result on the road in Kampala, Uganda, and then wrap it up back home, we could secure qualification relatively early with 1 or 2 games remaining in the group. If we can get 4 points from our next 2 games, that'll bring us to 10. And Ghana, who's sitting on 1 point now from the first 2 games, they'd have to make up the ground really fast. They'd probably have to win both of their next games in August just to keep on our tails. And if they don't, we might qualify before even having to play on the road in Accra, where that match would not even matter. They could beat us and we would still qualify with superior goal difference and or still higher number of points. So I'm going to pick Egypt this time to qualify. I'm crossing my fingers, hoping to God that we do. So my 5 picks to qualify for the World Cup from Africa are the Democratic Republic of Congo, Nigeria, Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, and Egypt. 2 African countries I predict will make their first ever appearance at the World Cup. That'll be DR Congo and Burkina Faso. And my third prediction is that African Cup of Nations current champions Cameroon will fail to qualify. So, thank you, and I'll still catch you in my next video. And until then, guys, peace out. Leave a comment below because I really want to hear what 5 countries from Africa do you think are going to qualify for the World Cup. And I'll see you in my next video, which will probably be tomorrow, God willing. Until then, guys, take care. Peace out.